Over the last 5 years, I've been transforming this orchard from a stuck, diseased, really stagnant orchard into a food forest. But if I could go back in time 5 years ago, or actually if I could just redesign this farm from scratch, how would I do it? The layout, species selection, installation process, fixing the margins. That's what I'm going to explore in this video. But real quick, before we dive in, if you're in New Zealand in October next month, we're doing some in-person trainings here. If you're interested, click the link below. So 20 years ago, this 1.5 hectare farm was entirely kiwi fruit, right? It's a huge crop in this region. It's actually really well known for kiwi fruit here. And so the whole farm was kiwi fruit 25 years ago. Then the previous owner ripped out 95% of it, left a little block of it out the back, and then started to transform section by section into other diverse fruit crops. Navel oranges, easy peel mandarins, apples, plums, avocados, persimmons, and then the whole perimeter of the farm surrounded in feijoas, pineapple guava for you in the United States. And so those were the block plantings, kind of a polyculture. They weren't super integrated, but distinct blocks of each of those, of different sizes. In some of the more marginal spaces, the smaller areas, a little bit more of a microclimate or a little small test plot, things like tamarillos, white sapote, figs, limes, grapefruit, and apricots. And so that was the species mix that we kind of inherited when we moved here in 2019. What else we inherited was the layout. So the layout of the farm was east to west. That's how the rows are oriented. So all the rows go east to west. Optimal row orientation is actually north-south. We'll explain why. It's all about sunlight penetration. The problem is that in winter, when the sun is really low in the horizon, right? You can imagine the sun coming across really low on the horizon. The front rows, they grow nice and tall. And what happens is, especially in winter, they start to shade. They cast a lot more of a shadow to the further back rows. East-west orientation is not ideal, but it's what we inherited. And that's part of what I would fix when we get to the stage of how I would actually redesign the farm. That's one of the majors. Another thing about the spacing of the lines, it's irregular. So sometimes there's 5 meters between two rows. Sometimes it's 4 meters. Sometimes it's 3 meters. And so irregular spacing is kind of a pain in the ass. And so that's another thing that I would fix. I would make more consistent spacing between the rows, suited for the equipment and the machinery. Now, the farm came with a small farm tractor. And so that's what the whole management is based on, is mowing with the flail mower. And we'll talk about why that's actually not ideal in an agroforestry. The flail mower is the piece that sits behind the tractor. It's used for mowing grass, keeping it short, and it can be used for mulching, but it's a really not ideal situation for agroforestry. We'll explain why and what might be a better solution. And so historically, the management of the orchard, that it would get mowed down the alleys and across in a grid pattern. And so that was the management. Isolated fruit tree plantings, mowing in both directions, crisscross to maintain the grass. And I'll show you why it didn't actually work so well. The situation that we arrived to when we first got here, some areas, some of the blocks were a lot more established. They were the areas that he first initially started planting like 20 years ago. So they were fully established orange trees, for example. But there were other areas, avocados, the mandarins, that had only recently just been planted. And because they were spot planted all alone in the grass, they were really struggling, especially with this management type, and especially considering the fact that the previous owners actually left like 1 or 2 years before they sold the property. And so it really kind of went into disrepair. It was unmaintained. And these trees that were suffering because the grass was growing up. And basically, if you know kikuyu grass, you're in New Zealand, it's a South African grass, really aggressive, and it basically climbs up the trees and pulls them down. And so a lot of the more recent plantings were really suffering, high disease pressure, lots of grass pressure. They weren't getting weeded. It was kind of a mess. That's where the agroforestry and my idea of how do we help these trees and turn into a food forest came from. But it didn't start off with smooth sailing, and that's what we're going to kind of get into now is what was the original impulse for starting this food forest in the first place? I wasn't a farmer to begin with. I actually had zero horticulture, no agriculture experience. I had the opportunity when I was in grade school to do a gardening class, and I absolutely did not. I was not interested. But I didn't have any background, no cultural, no upbringing in this field. So why am I doing this? Where did this come from? I've always been really passionate about stewardship and land management since I was a young kid. That sounds super official, but basically like spending time in nature and taking care of nature, being a good steward of the earth. And that graduated into going to school for environmental science and university. Loved it, biology, all that. And that resulted in me getting a job working for the government in both the US. So I worked for the National Park Service. And then when I came here in New Zealand, I worked for the Regional Council doing data collection, right? That's what you kind of go to school for environmental science, and they train you to become a field technician or a data analyst. And so that's what I was doing. I was a field technician. I was measuring trees. I was measuring rivers. It was phenomenal. It was great. It was exactly what you go to school for. But it didn't feel as rewarding. It didn't feel solution oriented, and really I felt kind of like a data monkey, right? You could train a chimpanzee to go collect data, and it didn't feel solution oriented enough. It felt like just going to measure the problem, measure the problem, measure the problem. We can see the problem, we can see the reasons, but not to do anything about it. And so that was I think I lasted like maybe 2.5 years in that role when I got to New Zealand before, in that time moved here. And this was the opportunity that I had. I'd never had the opportunity to kind of put the ecological practice. I didn't have a place to apply the ecology passion. I had my work, but that wasn't related to applying ecology. It was just measuring the problem. And so when my family and I landed here, I saw it and I felt it as an opportunity to get involved in ecology. It was an opportunity to get my hands in the ground and to practice what I felt so strongly about. That's where the idea originated. When we landed here, I was searching online, how do you manage an orchard in an ecological way? I had never even heard of permaculture before. It never even was taught in school. So when I learned about permaculture, I saw the definition, I said, that's what I want to do. And I knew it immediately. And so I took the first course that was available. It was a local course here in the Bay of Plenty. It was a year long. They were already 2 months in. I called the instructor. I said, hey, please let me in. I just discovered this. I'm super passionate. So she let me join 2 months late. And I absolutely loved it. The problem was this. I had the vision of turning this place into a food forest. I went to the permaculture course. It was great, a beautiful foundation, but it wasn't as complete. It wasn't as comprehensive as I would have needed it to be. And I felt that there were things missing. There was missing gaps. Especially there wasn't any particular practical approach to food forestry. In fact, my instructor even said food forests don't work in New Zealand. The climate's wrong, it's too humid, and just all these reasons why food forests don't work in this country. And I saw what they were doing. They were in their 50s wheelbarrowing mulch around upslopes, and they were in their 50s doing that. I'm in my 20s and I hate moving mulch, right? And so I knew there was a better way, but I still, during that first year of the permaculture course, there was no mention of syntropic agroforestry. So I was still applying what I was learning, trying typical permaculture guilds, doing mulch rings under the existing trees with cardboard and mulch. And it was a lot of work for not a lot of payoff. Another part of the big inspiration for creating this food forest, especially on this property that makes it quite unique, is the creek. It's a natural stream. Of course, it's been channelized. We're in the wetlands. All the streams here in New Zealand have been channelized for the most part. But it's a big inspiration of natural systems, natural beauty, and ecological function that doesn't exist up in the production areas. And so when I would go down to the stream and I would see these big, beautiful established trees, the banks are protected from erosion, and the microclimate there is really impressive. In winter, when it frosts up here, especially earlier on when we first moved here, it was getting hard frosts up here in the production area, but in the stream where there was a nice established microclimate with the big trees, there was no frost. Even just the peace and the serenity, without knowing all the technical details, I knew that the stream was a beautiful place. And maybe you have a spot like this on your property, on your farm. And I thought, man, I want to extend this microclimate and bring it up into the production area. I want to bring these conditions up in. And so that was part of the original inspiration, not knowing the how-to just yet, but I knew that dragging and pulling the microclimate from the stream, from the riparian area, up into the production space. And this area that we're standing in right now, this is actually one of the closest areas to the stream. The stream is just 15, 20 meters that way. And so it's working. It's, this is the middle of winter. At this time, 4 or 5 years ago, the microclimate here was not developed. And so all these bananas would be cooked. They'd be super frosty. Whereas now we've established the microclimate. It's developing. That's been one of the biggest pieces of positive feedback, positive reinforcement that I've seen over the last few years. I'll show you some drone footage from the first year of the microclimate not existing at all. Everything was cooked, to the second year where you can actually see the microclimate start to develop, where there's frost outside, but just inside there's protection. And then you can see even this year, the drone footage, how the microclimate is really expanded quite a lot over the last few years just from planting these fast-growing pioneer species. And we're going to talk about that and how it would be a strategy in the redesign of the whole farm. I haven't lost track, but I just wanted to make sure that there's some context here for what the original impulse was for how this idea spawned. It didn't come from an agricultural background, but it came from how do you bring ecology into the land, and especially how do you do that into a food production landscape, right? Because like I said, I wasn't interested in gardening. I wasn't an agricultural person, but that was more compelling of how do you bring ecology into agriculture rather than just native restoration, right? It's a lot more compelling when it's doing something good for the planet, something that aligns with your values, but also the selfish reason of like, I get year-round fruit. I'm eating more fresh produce from the land that I'm not, like, you don't even have access to buying the stuff that I'm producing. It's incredible. And so when you get the selfish benefit of eating better for yourself and the feel-good benefit of aligning with your values and making the planet a better place, building the ecology, it's a win-win. And so that's why bringing the stewardship ethic and the ecology into agriculture, that's what really resonated with me, and that's why I've kind of decided to really just fully commit to this path. So when I finished the PDC, my original food forest strategy was taking a look at, for example, all the existing citrus and saying, cool, I want to turn it into a food forest. And so the strategy was, it was simple, and I thought it was going to work, and it didn't. But here's what it was, is to just look at the gaps and say, okay, there's a tree missing right here, a tree missing there, there, and there. I'll just go plant a fruit tree. I'll just go plant a different fruit tree. So I started planting figs, I started planting carobs, all these different fruit trees just to fill the gaps. While it's not a terrible strategy, it certainly wasn't working. It wasn't working well at all for a variety of reasons that now I know. Back then, it just wasn't working, and it was hard, and it just wasn't successful. And so I thought, there's got to be a better way. So that was the first year of efforts after doing the PDC, is whether it was planting isolated, spot-planted fruit trees or guilds, where I would put some raspberries, I would put maybe a nitrogen fixer, some kind of ground cover, and I would plant them almost into a little nest, which is what I call them now. But even still, it wasn't that successful. Another thing that I haven't mentioned yet that was also only semi-successful early on was the animal integration. Previously, I'd set up a poultry net for chickens, ducks, geese, and pigs, and I would move these animals around throughout the systems. Now, it was great because they were adding fertility, they were helping with the grass management, they were giving eggs, but the downsides were also there. Challenging to manage pigs and geese and chickens and ducks, especially around new plantings. They're not sensitive to those things. So they would trample them, they would eat them, the chickens would scratch the mulch away, and yes, the egg production and the extra fertility was great, but A, it was a pain in the ass to move the netting, B, the pigs were escaping, right? And then they would go immediately and find the new planting areas. That lasted about a year and a half maybe, and then the animals went because I decided it was too complex to try and manage a flock of small animals along with all the new plantings. And so I started to prioritize the plantings. But now we've reincorporated animals, and so we'll get to how I've done that more intelligently, and it's working way better at the moment. Here's what's funny, is after the year-long PDC, the final design that I produced is actually not terribly different from what I'm doing today, almost 4 or 5 years later. But it is different in some really important ways, and so we're going to discuss it. The initial focus was to really incorporate more short life cycle species, faster producing ones, and long life cycle species, nuts, timber, because we had the medium succession, right, the fruiting species covered. Citrus, plums, apples, pears, peaches, fantastic. And so the focus was, what earlier succession crops can I include? Like raspberries, elderberries, hazelnuts, passion fruit, mulberry, figs, mushrooms, and all of those have been really successful. It's been phenomenal. Some of the longer term stuff that I was wanting to incorporate, things like walnuts, pecans, chestnuts, pine nuts, timber species like redwoods and other natives, they've also been included. They're doing phenomenally well. And so that's where the design initially out of the PDC was correct. And so the idea was to incorporate all of those into the existing planting. But did you notice? All of those trees were more of a temperate climate. They're all from a temperate climate or a Mediterranean community. There was no subtropicals on there, and what are we looking at around us here? It feels way more subtropical. And that was actually the original impulse. When I noticed the microclimate of the stream, we have wild bananas growing down there, right? They have seeds, but they're great for erosion control, organic matter, and that's part of what was so inspirational, is the microclimate that you can create, you can have down by the stream. That's what I wanted to bring up. But the species selection in the final design didn't reflect that. The species selection was reflecting the temperate and the Mediterranean conditions, not the subtropical conditions that we can create with the microclimate. And so that's one of the things that's changed the most. One of the things is the species selection has gone more towards subtropicals. The thing that initial plan also didn't cover whatsoever, it was totally lacking. Did you notice? That whole species list that I mentioned, there were no support species whatsoever. And what was the result of that? Well, the result was more grass pressure on those young trees and no fertility plan. And another key thing is that there was also no implementation strategy. It was just go spot plant something there, between the trees. There was no comprehensive implementation strategy to support those trees. And so that's more of like a gap filling strategy versus what I'm doing now is more of a full block retrofit, more comprehensive area by area. I'm finding that's way more effective. But the initial plan didn't include any of that. It was limited to temperate and Mediterranean species, no subtropicals. It was limited to no fertility plan and grass management because there was no support species. And the implementation process was just very basic gap filling, which also resulted in some of the problems, versus block planting. Long story short, the permaculture strategies weren't as useful as on their own as I was hoping they would be. It needed something else. The permaculture strategies and techniques were just missing something. And the missing part was the applied ecology. I mean, there was mention of ecology, but there was no how to. How do you actually apply the ecological principles to the food forest without just saying, food forests don't work? So that was the next chapter of exploration. And I used to be upset about it. I used to be upset that, how could my permaculture teacher not teach me about syntropic agroforestry? Why didn't they teach me about how to apply ecology? But then I remembered it's more like math, right? Your grade school math teacher, their job isn't to teach you calculus, right? That you're not ready for it, but you do need the foundation of geometry or whatever early math you're learning. It's a foundation, it's a stepping stone. You can choose to either not continue taking math classes and not develop any further, or you could see permaculture as a stepping stone to something greater. That's how I view it anyways. Helps me. And so on that quest for learning applied ecology, you stumble upon syntropic agroforestry. Beautiful day. And it was more practically useful. That's what I loved about it. And I saw results immediately. And even I could actually see the results peeking through some of the permaculture guild trials that I'd done, right? Some of the guild trials was a fruit tree. Some of them had ground covers, pollinators, whatever things, herbs, berries, and some of them had that same mix plus a nitrogen fixing tree, the tree lucerne. And just between these two trials, phenomenal difference, right? The one fruit tree would have been much happier just having the nitrogen fixer. And so that was an early indicator that doubling down on this strategy, which is really what applied ecology is. It's what we're doing in syntropic agroforestry, using ecological succession to drive things forward. And so that was the missing link. I needed to keep deepening my knowledge and understanding of syntropic agroforestry, and I found it was quite limiting here in New Zealand. I wasn't learning as much from people as I would have hoped. And so I went to Brazil twice. And then since then have now gone to over 100 different syntropic farms across Brazil, Costa Rica, Florida, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Tenerife, all these places, and gained a huge wealth of experience and knowledge. And so if there's one thing I could recommend is if you have the opportunity, go visit other farms. It's a great way to accelerate your learning. By the way, you can come here in October, do some hands-on training. Click the link. My mission there really, though, was to learn from the black belts, understanding that, hey, maybe I'm a white belt, or maybe I'm a blue belt, or maybe now I'm a purple belt, but you can always learn from the people who have more experience than you. That's the best way to learn anything. Is if you want to learn a new skill, don't just struggle on your own. I mean, you can struggle on your own. It'll take way longer. But your best bet is to go find somebody who's way better than you, and they'll help move you forward faster. And so that's what I was doing. I was going to learn with the black belts in Brazil and all these places, the most cutting-edge farms that I could get access to. I even in the first year made it to Ernst's farm. It was incredible. It was a huge honor and privilege to go there and to see the man himself, the Yoda of the forest.
It's something like, it's a crazy guy.
Yeah.
Okay, accept to be a crazy guy. Accept.
Yeah, embrace it.
Yeah, embrace it to be a crazy guy. And the crazy guy has more freedom than...
So let's talk about the progress and the evolution of the design over those last 5 years before we arrive at how I would do everything over from scratch if I started again. The progress and the evolution. I've seen the absolute fastest results from what we talked about before, applying ecology. What does that actually look like? What are the benefits of that? Well, one is better tree establishment. They're establishing better. Planting things in blocks. Not even just single rows anymore, because a single row has a lot of exposure to wind, a lot more grass pressure, whereas when you install in blocks, the perimeter is where the grass pressure is, right? And so reducing the surface area, reducing the maintenance effort and costs. Another thing that I'm doing is I'm consolidating all of my efforts. I'm no longer gap filling, doing things here and there. Consolidating your efforts into one main trial plot for the year or two always brings better results, just like in life. You only have so much energy, concentrate it, you'll be more effective. I've heard the analogy of you wouldn't want a shot glass worth of milk poured into a glass and the rest filled up with water. You'd have really diluted milk. Just have the shot glass of milk. Much nicer. So consolidate your efforts, better results. Part of better tree and system establishment is the microclimate, and it makes it more resilient. It makes your trees more resilient to frost. Previously, when I would plant grafted trees out in the open without a proper microclimate, they would get frosted and die. Or on the opposite side of things, they would be hit by the drought. We have really free draining soil here. It's really prone to drought after an extended dry period in summer. Way more resilient to all of those, right? In winter, there's more protection from the frost. In summer, there's more protection from the heat, more things covering the soil, more shade, more humidity, more comfortable environment. When all the citrus that's in the exposed open, in the middle of summer, it stops growing, it stops putting on new growth because it's just barely struggling to survive. Whereas here, in the established areas, the citrus is growing, pumping new growth all year long. I'm even looking at some right now behind you, and it's got fresh growth right now in the middle of winter when none of the other citrus that are exposed could possibly imagine. And so you're extending your photosynthesis, you're extending how much you're growing with the microclimate throughout the season. That's part of what that looks like, applying your ecology. And part of what's allowing for that is that support system, right? Of your emergent and your high strata support species. They're the ones creating those conditions. And so then whether it's grafted trees that you buy and plant underneath to get the nice conditions, or whether it's little seedlings that you plant from seed in the nursery, which we'll talk about. We've made many videos on that. Whether it's little seedlings you're planting and then field grafting at year 3 or year 4 to get production faster, but you're getting the benefits of the resilient taproot, resilient root structure. This has also eliminated the disease pressure. Right? When we first moved here, we were losing multiple citrus trees every single year to citrus borer. Every single year, we'd have to cut down multiple trees. And the disease pressure has significantly reduced since implementing agroforestry. We're no longer losing multiple trees a year. And it's resulting in less weeding, less grass pressure on the young trees that were previously struggling to survive. And so when it comes to sourcing material, having an effective nursery setup is really important for this. In the first year, I wouldn't try and do everything from seed. We're going to talk about what I would do in the first year. But what is important is setting up this blue support system in the field for your trees so you're not just throwing money down the drain, losing expensive grafted fruit trees. Another benefit that has come with this process of applying more ecology is we're eating more fresh produce throughout the entire year. Rather than it just being windows of seasonal eating more fresh fruit year-round than ever before. And also in that, you're identifying what are the key performers, what are the top performers in your climate, what are the seasonal gap fillers, right, between pear season and persimmons or citrus and mandarins. What are the different gap fillers? And so here we've identified a number of them that especially we're going to be focusing on more as time goes on, is the cherimoya and the atamoya, right? Annona family, beautiful fruits. Highland papaya, there's one right here behind me. The jaboticaba, nashi pears, ricotta chilies, gingers, tamarillos, bananas, and cooking plantains, white sapote, niche avocado varieties, so not the typical Hass one that you find in the grocery store, but things like the Esther, Hashimoto, Mexicola, all these different varieties and actually, do you know what's funny? The best avocado that we have on the land is ungrafted. It's a seedling avocado, best tasting, it's pumping fruit, and it's only like 10 years old, from seed, not grafted. And it's got the most fruit on it, of all the trees this year, and it tastes the best. The quality is phenomenal from a seed. Dispel of the idea in your head if you still believe that seed-grown fruit trees won't produce and it won't be nice fruit. It's a myth. These are the species that I'm finding are working well, and I'm going to be doubling down on for both marketability, what's extending the growing season. I'm also looking at a loquat right there and a Japanese raisin tree. Macadamia is not even on the list, but it's right here. All these trees you're experimenting with in your early years. But the important thing that you need to do is set up your support system for them to be happy, right? The macadamia right now, I'm looking at it, it's this tall. This is an area that's around 4 years old. So 4 years old macadamia this tall from seed. But the support system around it, the eucalypts, the acacia, the tree lucerne, the poplar, whereas when I would buy grafted macadamia trees for $60 a tree before this was all developed, in winter, they'd be yellow and shriveled up and cold and frostburnt and dying, whereas now I've got these beautiful, just show you right here, look at this. Healthy, it's growing, middle of winter. It would never look like that if you bought that from a nursery as a grafted tree, but it was grown from seed with a eucalypt right above it, a native species, the loquat, the Mexican sunflower. You're creating these conditions. Underneath, there's a guava, right? Fruit is ripening. Underneath the guava, there's a cherimoya right here, right? So all of that's planted in a super close spacing. I didn't waste a bunch of money on trees that suffered from the nursery. I planted things from seed in a native nursery. Here's a Japanese raisin tree. It's coming alive. And so in this one little space, we have loquat, Japanese raisin, guava, cherimoya, macadamia, all in this 1 meter spacing, all of which are below our support system. So that's what I mean. That's what we're talking about. And just a really quick technical layout detail, all of those are planted in a single line. All of the trees are planted in line with each other. Now, what's not planted in the line are the shrubs, the things that are going to have a shrubbier growth habit like the Mexican sunflower, like the Bana grass or the Napier grass, or like the elderberries, or like the Jerusalem artichokes. Putting them on the edge, off to the edge, especially what I'm doing is I'm putting them on the sunny side, on the north side here in the southern hemisphere, to shelter and protect, right? So all the trees, all the fruit tree seeds are going in a single line, and all the offset species on the edge are things that I'm comfortable to either use a brush cutter or a chainsaw, basically just things that I don't want to be having a chainsaw in my tree line, and so I'll just offset them. That's how I draw ducks. Here's what the animal situation looks like now. It's improved. We're not getting any of the downsides that we were before. It's actually working really nicely. So I want to explain here, and then we're going to go actually take a look at them. But essentially what I'm doing, and this is something that I don't see commonly done, when I see people incorporating birds, especially chickens, into their agroforestry systems, they're making an effort to maintain them not in the tree lines. They're excluding the tree lines from the birds because especially chickens have a propensity to scratch. They'll remove all the mulch, they'll kick it around and damage young seedlings. The benefit of ducks is that they're not doing that, and so I can actually incorporate them into the tree lines. And so that's kind of what things look like at the moment. And so the setup where they're at right now specifically is in an area that was young trees retrofitted into agroforestry. And so we have some larger semi-established mandarins and then tree lines of younger agroforestry planting between. And what we're doing is we have the blue electric poultry netting along with their movable sled. Now, an important upgrade that I made on the sled, I used to have an older version that I built. It was really difficult to move, it was challenging, it wasn't quite the right dimensions, but now I've got one that was well built and it actually fits the dimensions perfectly. So it slides really nicely between the tree lines, even including the edge plantings of the Mexican sunflower. So you have to account for that. And that's what I mean is if you're going to be including animal integration into your system, design it up front for that. Don't then have to retroactively go and try and fit animals into a system that wasn't designed initially for animals. Set things out the way that you expect you might incorporate, whether it's certain machinery or animals, into the future. And so moving the tractor every couple days, it's got a ton of fertility that it's leaving behind, and then eventually we move the net after about a week. The fertility that's being added at night from the tractor, the feeder roots of the citrus are reaching right for that already. So it's benefiting the citrus, the established citrus, it's benefiting the grass, and they're also doing really great grass management around the trees in between. They're eating the grass, they're not scratching the mulch, and they're actually really quite delicate and sensitive to all the little seedlings that are planted. They're not pulling them out, they're not scratching around. I'm very impressed with the ducks' behavior. They're also starting to give eggs, which is super exciting. Let's go check it out, because at the moment this system is working really well. We've also got a little watering setup where it's a half-cut IBC. Let's go take a look. We've got two breeds. There's Muscovy ducks and I think it's a Indian runner cross. And so the idea is to harvest some meat birds and eggs. We've got between 15, 20 birds at the moment, and you can scale this up or down. You can have multiple flocks, but here's the setup, is the electric netting. We've got this really well built from a friend, movable tractor that has obviously a spot for eggs, and it's actually built out of aluminum framing from windows. Super convenient. Back half is covered, front half is mesh. The bottom opens, so every day they go out, come in, they add the fertility, and we're actually going to move this today because they spend 1 or 2 days per spot, move it forward, and you can actually see the half-cut IBC, the value that they're bringing, eggs, fertility, just extra life, pest control. Very happy with the ducks. This is the tree lucerne, and at the moment they're just flowering like crazy. One of the key species, it's a native to Tenerife or the Canary Islands, and in free draining, more sandy soil types, it's phenomenal. And so this is one of the key support species here, and every spring we cut it back really hard. I cut like 95% of the foliage off, and so that's what we're going to do. But in terms of animal integration, just simplifying things, right? Making it so that it's not multi-species at the moment. They're animals that work really well with the trees that we have, with the systems that are in place. And I find ducks just have way more personality than chickens. I like ducks a lot more. So really enjoying them. And that's how I would continue designing it from scratch, making sure your spacing is right, depending on what kind of animals, what kind of equipment you're going to be moving around. It's all part of that thought process. The key here so far with everything that I've said is that I'm constantly learning new lessons, and I'm even still today learning new lessons from old experiments. There are experiments that I did 4 or 5 years ago that I'm still getting new information from this season. And I actually posted something inside the free community we have, the Food Forest family. It's a full breakdown of one of the old experiments that I did. If you want to join, just click one of the links below, Food Forest family, and I post stuff there that doesn't always make it to YouTube. We do events, live stuff, so join the Food Forest family to get that insight and join some upcoming events that we have. What does all of this mean about how I would go about redesigning the farm from scratch? Let's dive in. So I mentioned before about equipment. Having rear-mounted equipment that's mounted on the back of your machine, isn't always ideal, especially if it's for cutting and mulching, because you're forced to drive over the material before you can cut it or mulch it. And especially because a lot of the work we do with plants isn't just about mowing low grasses, it's about mowing either clumping grasses, caning grasses, shrubs that grow tall, things like Mexican sunflower, bonnegrass, elderberry, Jerusalem artichokes, Napier grass, I don't know if I already said that. Those things don't work so well on a rear-mounted flail mower. And so that's why that's actually not the ideal attachment, even though it's what we have. Much better to have a front-mounted cutting or mulching equipment. That would be ideal. Something like a hedge trimmer, which is these like sickle bars, plus a hay rake, which would basically flick all the material over so it's in one pass. You're cutting the material, and then you're organizing it onto your tree lines. This is what they use to scale their systems in Germany. It was a rapid piece of equipment. I'll show you the photo. And on one piece of equipment, it's the hay rake, which makes for a really nice clean cut. That's another problem with flail mowers, is they make really ugly cuts. And the uglier the cut, the longer the recovery before it can really start regrowing again, right? And so you want clean cuts, and you want to have nice organization of it. A flail mower just spins the material around, and then you have to come back either manually raking. Whereas with a piece of equipment that will do that for you, you're just expanding how much you're able to do. That's why they're able to plant 50 hectares in a year of syntropic agroforestry and manage it, because they have the hay rake on the sickle bar mower. Super useful. And there's lots of great attachments that you can find for things like a BCS, right? A walk-behind tractor, 2-person. Now, hard to get in New Zealand, so depending on where you are, access to certain equipment is more challenging. And that's part of it is here. I'm trying to work with equipment that is common for New Zealand farms to have. Yes, you can always import something, but there's value in figuring out how to make systems work, whether it's with, existing equipment, additional attachments that are already existing. We don't need to go invent a bunch of fancy new stuff. When we have equipment that works, it's just about creatively figuring out how to use it in a more regenerative context. So that's element one of what I would reconsider, is I would consider getting different equipment for the farm, and that would dictate a whole lot about, especially the next section, which is the layout and the orientation, right? The orientation of the lines and the layout. So like I mentioned before, at the moment, the lines are running east-west. I would prefer to run them north-south. And so on a property that's rather long and narrow like this, we've got multiple blocks of lines running east-west. And there's some aspect of this that's convenient. One is having an access path that goes all the way to the back. What I would prefer to have is a major access that goes around the entire perimeter, and then all of my lines would run north-south like this. So that's number one in terms of orientation and layout. Instead of planting in blocks of just oranges or just mandarins or just persimmons, I would be planting in alternating lines of different species or different species combination, strata pairs, for example. Here's what I mean. So here's what strata pairs can look like. You have an emergent layer and a medium layer. And so an example in this context might be having a pecan or a walnut or a pear or a Japanese raisin tree. Those are all emergent species, and I would pair them in the same line with a set of medium species, like mandarin, like peach. So at the moment what happens is, in a pear line, for example, in one of the pear areas, every 6 meters, there's a pear. Now, that's plenty of space to, in between the pears, go and include a medium strata mandarin or a medium strata peach, right? And so that's what it would look like. Each of these lines would have distinct strata pairs, whether it's emergent medium of those options that I shared before, or you could go high, low, right? And the reason that works really well, especially for scaling systems, and I want this to be super clear, yes, you can fit all 4 layers in the same system. That's what I've got here. The problem is it's chaos, it's complex, and it's not focused. There's not a particular one crop in this area, except for the cherimoya, which I've planted super high density that eventually will be the main crop, but it's not focused from the onset. Whereas these systems, if I were redesigning it from scratch, I'd be really deliberate about exactly what crops I've got at what spacing and what lines in what orientation and layout. And so I would go through this mental exercise of saying, cool, I've got my emergent medium strata pairs, I've got my high-low strata pairs, and so then maybe I would just alternate lines. So every other line is high-low, every other line is emergent medium, and then I've got a few different assortments of high-low. Maybe I have an avocado as a high, or a macadamia, or a lucuma, or a white sapote as a high, right? Paired with something low, like the jaboticaba. You could do coffee, monstera, certain gingers. And so you're pairing these for ease of management, for ease of harvesting, for focus. Because at the moment, if you're just going super high diversity and craziness, yes, it's super valuable in a laboratory, right? We've spoken a little bit about this. You plant your laboratory when you're first starting out, super high density, crazy. But as you expand, you want to have more focus. You want to have your systems more dialed in for production. And so that's what I'm aiming at. And if I were to redesign the whole farm, I would have it like this. Focused production pairs. That's how I would do it. And this is the exciting thing is at the moment we're retrofitting a kiwi fruit block and turning it into something like this. And so you'll get to see what that looks like on the ground in terms of resetting the system, implementation, and the outcomes of what it looks like when you actually plan from the start. We'll see that later. But what I would also do, aside from the layout, another key element that I would use to redesign the entire farm is global planting. Global planting of pioneer species, and that's how it fits into this framework of the laboratory, right? Your laboratory is the area that you start, high diversity, crazy, but as you're doing that at the same time, you're globally planting your land with pioneer species, the ones that are the most reliable, your weedscape, the ones that are in the ditches on the side of the roads and the drains. These fast-growing ones often need their nitrogen fixers, they're accumulator species, they're the weedy, probably exotic in some cases. They're from Australia. We love our Australian species and people. You're globally planting with those in advance of putting your high-value trees in. And so what it would look like, depending on if it's going to take you, maybe you get to this area in year 2, this area takes you year 5 to get there. Maybe you decide in some areas, you just incorporate your fruit trees underneath your global planting trees, underneath your support trees. But in some situations, maybe it takes you 5 years to get there. Maybe you do a full elimination and cut down all your support trees and then plant your fruit trees. Depending on what your priority is, if your needs are more having organic material versus if your needs are more having microclimate, shelter, shade, that's the balance that you're playing on. Do I keep all the support species up when I incorporate my fruit trees down the line, which by the way, those fruit trees came out of your air prune beds, your nursery. And so as you're doing your global planting across the whole farm, you're also developing your nursery so that as the land is being prepared, you're also being prepared so you're not spending a ton of money on expensive grafted trees, putting them out into land that's not ready for it. And you can always do this. You can always go plant grafted trees into your pioneer system, into your accumulation system. You can always do that, but certainly establish your nursery alongside everything else. And so some examples of support trees that I'm using particularly well and work in a lot of different climates and contexts are the following. Tree lucerne, eucalyptus, acacia, poplar, willow, alder, paulownia, casuarina, wild biomass bananas, the ones with seeds, pigeon pea, leucaena. These are all plants that grow really well in poor soil conditions, and this is what it would look like. So you're not just planting a single one. I have somebody who's in the mentorship, and they planted a bunch of pigeon pea. What happened was a cyclone came through and knocked their whole accumulation system of pigeon pea down, and then the grass reinvaded. And how that might have been protected is one of two ways. One, having more diversity. All right, so in my accumulation systems, I'm not just going in with the tree lucerne. Now, can you do that if you find an absolute winner on your site? Yeah, if tree lucerne just goes for you, you can absolutely just plant like a 1 meter or a 2 meter or a 3 meter grid everywhere of tree lucerne. Let that be your accumulation system. But there's always going to be more resilience in diversity. There's going to be overlap. There's going to be more ecological niches. And what it gives you is the option to say, when you come in to incorporate your edible species, maybe you just selectively thin out all the tree lucerne, but you leave the acacia or you leave the poplar or the slower growing support species so that you're not fully resetting everything, but you are still getting the benefits of organic material, the growth pulse from a full reset of clearing certain trees out, opening certain canopy layers, but you're also retaining the benefits of the shade, the microclimate from the more established support trees. Hopefully we're keeping track. I know we're like going into it, but hopefully this is providing useful to you. If you want these kind of things every single week, we do this live session like multiple times in the fellowship. Come hang out. But that's a super important part of this, is leading with the pioneer species, global planting. It's one of the things that I would not skip. Don't skip. If I was redesigning this farm from scratch, the first whole year would be dedicated, not to edible stuff, the first whole year would be dedicated to planting pioneer species everywhere. If I haven't determined all the access and all the layouts, that's still okay. Plant abundantly, and then you can always just carve out your access into that. So, right? If you plant on a 1 meter grid everywhere, so you can overlay this on GIS, on Google Earth, you can map what does a 1 meter grid look like, how many plants do we need to order, plant it on a 1 meter grid, and then in year 2, you just say, hey, we've decided this is an access, cool, you clear that line of trees, or these 2 lines of trees, and it's still of service. You still have the organic material, you still change the conditions, improve the fertility, biomass, all that. And so that would be an unskippable step, is GP. Not MotoGP, but global planting. As you're in that step, test different variety trials. Do variety trials when you're early because you don't know what varieties are going to work best. When I first started, I was doing a lot of eucalyptus variety trials, and I've since found the ones that work the best here at my site. And now I can make more informed decisions for myself and recommendations to others. I'm now doing the same exact thing this year with poplar. And so we've got a poplar variety that works really well, really reliably here in these conditions for New Zealand. Kawa, K-A-W-A poplar. It's beautiful. But I want to learn more. I want to learn and get more familiar with different poplar varieties. And so I've made a big order this season of a bunch of different poplar varieties, and they're going to be planted into this new system this year. So I get to make observations. I get to test and see which poplar varieties work best in these situations. You get more information, more data. And I wish that I had done that in year 1 rather than waiting until year 4 or 5. So I could have all that information pulled forward, because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to pull the future forward. And that's what I'm hoping to pass on with this, is you're pulling the future forward faster by going through these strategies. And so hopefully you're making use of this stuff, and whether you're taking notes or whether you're applying piece by piece in your farm, that's what I'm trying to pass on to you, is helping you to like skip years of confusion or lack of clarity or not knowing how to start, where to go, what to do, pulling the future forward. So hopefully if it's useful, click subscribe if you haven't already. I would take then years 2 through 5. And so if year 1 is dedicated to just global planting, GP, years 2 through 5 is when then I would be focused on using my air prune beds, using the nursery, and filling in block by block. And I wouldn't try all of it at once, but I would be putting the plant together, growing the species, and then incorporating it as I had capacity, right? Using the next following years as your support species are changing conditions, building things up, building fertility, adding organic material, even the leaf litter. You don't even have to do super aggressive management on your support species. The more you can, awesome, but there are areas here that I can show you later, maybe in another video, that I've fully abandoned, I've fully neglected, I haven't touched it in like 3 years, and the support species are still doing their function. They're pioneering, they're adding leaf litter, they're moving the grass out and changing the conditions and making it much more suitable for fruit trees under like zero management. Something to consider. One of the other major redesigns would be about the riparian area. How do you make the most use of that? This is a strategy that I would incorporate from the start if I had the opportunity to. Riparian nutrient farming, RNF, riparian nutrient farming. And it's a really great strategy whether you're having a dairy operation, whether you're doing horticulture, if you have access to a riparian area, a stream, a ditch. If you're familiar at all with what natural sequence farming is, I'm going to simple it down into a really stupid, simple way. But essentially, it's reforesting, revegetating riparian areas close to water bodies, streams, flowing water. You're reforesting and revegetating it. You're stabilizing the slope. And what that's doing is it's helping to slow down the water, shade it, cool it down, and capture nutrients that might otherwise be going from the land, or it's capturing nutrients that are coming from upstream. And these trees are embodying, taking up those nutrients. And the next step is to then take that fertility that they're capturing and redistribute it outwards and upwards into the catchment. So you're using these riparian areas to redistribute the nutrients higher into the catchment. And if you think about salmon, we were having this conversation before, if you think about salmon, they're doing the same thing. Salmon go out into the ocean, they fatten up, they get all their nutrients, they come back upstream. And who takes the salmon and the nutrients that they have from the stream into the forest? The bears, the animals. And so when you lose salmon out of the ecosystem, and I know we're getting wild, but I promise, stick with me. You remove salmon out of the ecosystem, there's a lot less of that nutrients coming up into the ecosystem, into the land, into the forest. Long story short, salmon are the vehicle to transport nutrients from the stream higher into the landscape, right? No salmon, no vehicle, no nutrient transfer. How does it relate? Well, what we're doing, our trees are acting in the same way. When you don't have trees on a stream or a riparian area, a drain, a ditch, whatever it is, you're losing the opportunity to A, stop erosion, right? Stabilizes the bank, cool the water down, more of an ecosystem, but B, you're losing the opportunity to capture water, nutrients, minerals from the stream, from higher in the catchment. You're losing the opportunity to take those nutrients and use them to rebuild the fertility higher into your own landscape, into your own catchment. So that's what we're doing here. That's what we're doing down along the riparian area this season here on the farm, but it'd be a huge strategy if I were designing this from scratch that would incorporate along the whole, we've got like almost half a kilometer of riparian area on the property of basically what would be coppice and pollard systems, right? Coppicing means cutting at the ankles, pollard means shoulders and above. I would be putting willow and poplar, coppice and pollard systems in place on the riparian areas. Both of those species are great accumulators, right? Fast growing from cuttings, put poles in the ground, they put their roots, capture the nutrients and move them up. They're also really great at keeping nutrients from flowing. If you're on a dairy farm, for example, keeping the nutrients from flowing into the waterways. Fantastic. And so what I'd be doing is every year on a 1 or 2 year cycle, you're coppicing the willow, taking that material, moving it higher up into the catchment to feed your production areas, right? So you're bringing that nutrient from the willows, you're pollarding the poplar, same thing. Nice thing is really soft wood, easy to mulch, straight growth habit, especially when you're managing it. And that just goes straight into a chipper and brings the fertility to your trees, right? And it's also part of expanding the microclimate. You can put the same species up here. High pollards on the poplar, above your citrus, above your plums, above whatever. Saw some beautiful systems in Portugal. Like I think there were probably like 5.5 meter pollards above what was just a monoculture of plums. Super simple, easy to manage. People know how to do a monoculture of plums and then your pollarded poplar above that. Now, is it super chaos and crazy, complex, diverse, and dense? No. Does it have to be? Not in every situation. And so this would be a big strategy, redesigning the farm from scratch. Now, a lot of it already is vegetated, which is fantastic. Keeps the ecology intact. We've got some beautiful eels here. It's a really lovely stream. But if I were to redesign it from scratch, this is the strategy that I'd be doing for the whole half a kilometer. All right, imagine how much nutrient every year you can be importing passively with ecology. And here's a reality check about the redesign of the farm, how to redesign things. The trick is actually that the design isn't as important. I know, we've spent a whole video watching about design. What is design not as important as? Good management. You can design the perfect farm, the perfect agroforestry, syntropic farm. You can have a perfect layout, plan, design, even plant it perfectly. But if you have poor management, it's going to suffer. And I've seen so many beautiful permaculture designs. I've seen so many beautiful permaculture properties that were planted and laid out and designed really well. But the management isn't there to back it up, and they go stagnant. They turn ugly. They go unproductive. They're poorly managed. Whereas on the controverse side, or the inverse, I've seen properties that weren't designed well. They weren't even designed at all. It was just, whatever existing vegetation, or poorly planned, or poorly planted, or whatever it was. Under good management, and you can create a thriving system very, very easily. Good management is always going to beat a good design. Good management cannot replace poor design. Did I say that right? You know what I'm meaning. It's a night and day difference, learning how to manage, and you have to get into the field. You have to get your skills, and you just have to do it. You can't learn about it. It's not a two-dimensional lesson. It's a three-dimensional lesson. So if you want to learn that lesson here in these exact systems that we're standing in right now, if you want to come manage, prune trees, learn 3D learning, click the link below. Come hang out in New Zealand, October 2nd to the 7th. So what's the vision for the future? How am I applying all this going forward? So on a small, relatively small 1.5 hectare farm, we're not doing massive production here. And so how do you fix the margins? Because they're not great on wholesale fruit. It's a commodity, right? Even if you're organic certified, it's still a commodity. How do you differentiate yourself? Because the farm doesn't pay for itself in production alone. right? It's more of a hobby farm in that sense, but it is producing, just not enough to pay for itself. And so how would I redesign this with that in mind? Well, the key pattern would be not growing for wholesale. Instead, I would do two things. One, I would shift more towards a year-round fruit subscription CSA. And we're getting there. We have fruit happening year-round, where every 2 weeks of the year, there's something ripe and ready to be delivered in a box to your doorstep. That's how I would approach it from day one. Instead of block planting of just this one crop and just this one crop where it's still quite seasonal, it would be spread even more throughout the season, less reliant on wholesale, more CSA, right? Local subscribers, local customers. Would be number one. Number two, I'd be thinking about a value-added product line. That's where the margin is. Again, the margin is not in raw fruit sales. And so if you can find a way to add value, right? We have a commercial kitchen here. Now it's been mostly unutilized, but that's not the plan forever. The plan is to eventually create value-added products with what's growing. I'm not going to give too much away, but recently I've been trying and making some really great recipes for banana cherimoya ice cream, phenomenal, and orange creamsicle. But that's what I'd be approaching it. That'd be the lens. And as I implement new systems, even the one that's going in this year, that's the lens that I'm passing all these species through. Is, do you contribute towards extending the season? So not just stacking on top of the season that's already quite productive, but how do you, what species can fill those gaps where there's maybe a month with lower production? What species are the seasonal gap fillers, and how do they contribute towards a value-added product? Right? Whether it's herbs and spices for something, whether it's aromatics for cosmetics, whether it's unique fruit for making the CSA more interesting, whether it's for ice cream, whether it's for fruit leathers, whatever equipment and processing abilities you have, right? Whatever interest you have. I personally don't have a huge interest in canning, but I love ice cream. And so finding a way to make it work for you, your lifestyle, what you have access to, and what resources you have. Stick around, because that's what you're going to see more of, is how do we retrofit that kiwi block out the back into a more elegant and productive agroforestry that's more aligned with, these best practices in terms of design, how I would go about doing things in the future. So if I could start over from scratch here at this farm, that's more or less how I would do it. Global planting of pioneer species, better orientation, layout, and access, more thoughtful species selection for niche or higher value crops, value added stuff, and designing it for good management rather than having a good design. So a lot of that is also based on equipment. That's what I'd be looking at. So don't skip those steps. If you made a list, if you took some notes, awesome. But the truth is that master plan designs aren't useful. They don't sell master plan. Even the word blueprint is what I offer, but it's not me going away and making this big master plan. It's working alongside you, because that's the process you need to go through. I see so many expensive permaculture designs out there that it ends up being an expensive PDF. Whereas a living design process, this is something that I was taught early on as I got into this, that's how it ought to be. A living design process is not a static, stuck, this is your document. It's iterative, it's explorative, it's an incremental improvement process, and each step allows you to see more clearly the steps ahead of you. You don't need a full roadmap of every single thing over the next 5-10 years. You need, what are we doing in the next 6 months? What are the priorities, and how is that going to change the following 6 months? And so if you're interested in that, that's how I work. But the key part really, yes, a design can be helpful. Obviously there's frameworks that we can use to support good practices. But at the end of the day, being on the land, engaging, that's where the learning happens. It's 3-dimensional learning. And so if you got anything out of this, go apply it. Don't just sit and accumulate notes. Go do something. Go do something with this information. Make it useful, make it real for yourself, and I'll see you in the next one. Keep growing. Might be a good one here, right there, that video.